sponsor a meeting with Red Robin Food. She wouldn't.
Oh,
So
no.
I tried really hard.
It's okay, I'm going to the Bob's after this. So.
Oh, nice.
Bob's are for boomers.
Yeah.
And we're live.
Okay, so.
Oh.
Well, I thought that video was kind of interesting that we watched.
Oh, yeah.
It was cute until the singing started happening, and I was like, oh god. It was so bad. It was so bad.
So cringy.
I still listened to the whole time.
But like
What's happening?
the information was really interesting.
Yeah.
It was hard for me to even focus on that information now.
I mean, that's
So
true.
bad.
I was just like cringing so hard.
The rap part.
Oh.
I just couldn't. But sorry, I just had to say it.
No, yeah. Wasn't it on your like Instagram story or something?
I put it on my Snapchat story.
Yeah.
I'm not putting it on my Instagram story. That's
Snap.
good stuff. Yeah.
Snapchat's for the crazy shit.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
There's a Snapchat self and then there's an Instagram self.
My Instagram's the only picture of my dog. But the only thing I ever post on there. My doggy. I don't even know how to post a photo on Instagram.
Jesus, Alex.
Yeah, you probably don't. You know, I was gonna follow you, but it didn't seem like you're like using
Okay, so the only reason I have one is because my friends started tagging me and stuff on Instagram, and Facebook automatically made an Instagram for me.
Right.
So I clicked on the link, and all of a sudden it was like, "Here's your Instagram." I was like, "Oh,
Weird.
okay." And now people are like following me. I'm like, "Have fun." There's nothing on there.
Yeah. What is your post? So back to
Oh yeah, oh yeah.
post.
So, Paula, I'm pretty sure, was this like your first experience hearing about Bix and Calps?
Yes.
What did you think about that?
I thought it was a lot of good information because you talked about it, and then Teddy, did you bring it up?
It was me.
Both, yeah, both of you guys brought it up too, because I didn't read about it anywhere else, like on the text or anything. But you guys talked about it, and like I like the examples you gave.
Which examples did I give?
Kind of.
Remind me how brilliant I am, please.
Oh, thank you.
Like when you were talking about like tests or exams.
Yeah, that was what the Blake said.
Giving them orally could like intonation or context cues are really important for kids. And just like if you read the academic language like all on a test, it's really hard for them to understand. So I thought that made a lot of sense.
Mm-hmm.
I get it.
And I actually utilized that in our post-assessment for my science practicum because I'm in a first grade classroom and we have a lot of kids who just struggle real hard with writing. And like they'll have so many ideas, they'll just like talk in a group and they'll be like, oh, I think it's this because of this and this, but they can get like one word down. And so we actually had, because it was a group of 3 of us, and we had one of the teachers pull out a like small group of kids that we felt would need more help. And we like basically gave the assessment to them orally and like had it more of a conversation as opposed to like fill this out. And it was really good because we got some more information like explaining why they answered something. So like they were able to tell us what they meant, and also we were able to understand more of their thinking as teachers.
Right. And that just makes so much of a difference rather than like everybody's taking the same test.
Yeah.
And whether they can read and write it is a lot different than their answers.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm. It's week 9.
Teddy and I did our presentation on this, so we're
Oh,
gonna
yeah, that's right.
That's a lot of things in Cal's time.
Well, actually, like part of the research that we did was talking about how a lot of people aren't using the terms Bix and Calp anymore because they have kind of a negative connotation now. That,
Really?
Yeah, like because Calp stands for cognitive academic language proficiency, and so I guess a lot of people were saying that kind of implies that ELL students who aren't yet don't really have that academic language proficiency or like somehow like cognitively deficit, which is like not what they're trying to say.
Yeah.
But it kind of like sounds like that.
Mm-hmm.
By,
Just
like,
the
the
word
term.
cognitive in there.
Yeah,
Yeah,
well,
so
just
they
make it
Make it output.
Yeah, just make it
Yeah.
out.
So they like that's what we were reading about is how they don't really use that word anymore.
Mm. That's interesting. I've never heard of that about that.
Mhm.
Yeah, and I don't know, I think that it's really interesting because a lot of like just when you just research it, they very much separate the two and like have it sort of be like two opposites, like this is conversational, this is academic. But you have to sort of dig deeper to actually find a discussion on bringing those together. Because everyone is just like, oh, they're different and this is easier than the other. Like, this is more cognitively demanding than the other. But the discussion really should be around, like, how can we bring those together?
Mhm. Yeah, I haven't really seen that anywhere either. Yeah.
Mhm.
Is that like a mini question?
Oh,
Like what?
Paul's on this. 2 minutes in.
Yeah.
5 minutes.
Mm-hmm.
So the question?
Is it how?
Where can we find research on like, well, someone else should do this, I suck at words.
Conversationally or academically?
About utilizing Bix and Calps together.
When I first saw what chapter we had to read for this week, I was like, ah, we got this.
Check it, that's done.
Oh, really? You read it for your presentation too?
Mhm.
Well, at least you know it really well now.
Well, it's like
Right,
Paula
got
was
it,
doing
yeah.
another presentation on culture relevant teaching.
Oh my gosh,
Yeah,
really?
that's what I was working on my paper. Except with
Ruby.
Ruby, yeah, with an emphasis on American Indian education.
Cultural
Interesting.
relevant teaching. I just did a huge presentation
That's fun.
So did
about how experiencing diverse cultures is what we were talking about before 64, about basically
Oh, yeah.
being out of the box and traveling will help you be a culturally relevant teacher.
You did a presentation?
In my 405 class.
Oh, okay. Because you said 464 and I was
Well,
like,
no, that's
Yeah,
what
I
we
was
were
like,
talking
I
about
didn't
in
do that
464,
presentation.
but I did a presentation on it in 405.
yeah,
Okay.
I got my, so I made my CDL and I made like a photo book on Shutterfly. That was basically like a scrapbook talking about book censorship.
Mm-hmm.
And
Interesting.
I just got it today and it was so cool and I like am really proud of it. But
Do you
they
guys think we should have more books in there? Not
I
just
don't know.
textbooks, but actual.
like more like child friendly nonfiction books, or is that what you're saying?
Sure.
Because they have
Or when you
those.
say like other than textbooks, like the
Like, kids are not excited by nonfiction books and textbooks.
Yeah.
And so if you kind of like merge the two, merge it, guys. Merge the two together. I don't know what else. I'm really tired.
Yeah, I was like, I missed that. Like, is that an inside joke? I don't know about because no one else is laughing.
It just sounded really funny. I'm loopy at this point.
It's okay.
Bringing the two together between social language and academic.
But I feel like they do that for elementary nonfiction. Like, there's a lot of really interesting
Yeah.
books I remember reading about like animals or like scientific terms, you know. But like, it was really cute.
A new, like, I think nonfiction texts in elementary school is kind of like being revitalized right now
Yeah,
too.
it
Like there's a lot
is.
of really new, like really cool
Maybe that's what it is.
nonfiction books that are like picture books too, and they're like super interesting.
Okay.
I think it's something that's kind of happening more right now too.
Yeah.
Because when I
making more
picture
appealing.
nonfiction books, I think of like the informational, just straight text, like with a couple pictures here and there that I remember from my childhood.
Mm-hmm.
But if they're revamping them, that's awesome.
Yeah, I feel like the ones that I've seen are more like, I don't know, they're almost more like scrapbook style.
Okay.
Like they'll have like pictures and then little like bubbles and captions and
Yeah.
Mhm.
little
awesome.
things there. And so it's a lot more inviting as opposed to just like, I remember it's like the white page, the one picture and then the text under it. Like, do you know what I'm talking about? How,
Like
Exactly.
encyclopedia style. Kind of.
yeah, kind of, but how like, especially on books like children's nonfiction books for like on people, it was always like just a blank white page with one large picture and then like words under it. And so it was just like really uninviting and just sort of not like visually interesting.
I guess I have seen more books like what Tony was talking about, with like the think it's for blobfish. It has that nasty ass blobfish.
Oh, yeah.
I know exactly which fish you're talking about.
Yeah, with the big nose.
Yeah, I feel like
Yeah.
roll down like the side of it. You're just like, you belong in the ocean.
Isaiah read that to our first grade science class, and they loved it.
Oh,
Yeah.
so cute.
For my 405 class, we had to do this like project online where we made a website, you know, like all these different, you could like pick a category, and mine was on like good children's books with like strong female characters in it. And so a lot of the books I had were like nonfiction, like biographies about like,
Mhm.
you know, Amelia Earhart and Rosa Parks and that
Malala.
No,
No.
it was this, I'm trying to remember her name now. It was the first like African American woman to ever sing like in Washington DC like publicly. But she was
Oh,
like an opera
I
singer.
know who you're talking about.
She like sang in front of like the Lincoln Memorial, but it was like this huge deal because it was not like allowed back in like the or you know like 50s or something.
Starts with an
She was
M.
like, yeah, it's like something like that.
I'm Googling it.
Interesting.
Our money question, who is that?
But like all of the books that I wrote about for that were super like, you know, like there's just beautiful like murals and illustrations all in them, and it's not like a whole lot of writing, it's like little, you know, snippets, but it felt more accessible also, but also just more fun.
I did your presentations really similar to that for my women's studies class last quarter. I just plotted a bunch of books with strong female role models for like, elementary kids.
Yeah.
We talked about it.
Marian Anderson.
Yeah.
Oh.
Hey, it was Marian Anderson.
Yeah, thanks.
You're welcome.
Oh, I got it. It's Marion. It's
Oh.
Marion Anderson.
I think her last name's Anderson.
Oh.
Mm.
Anyways.
Are we supposed to talk about were we supposed to post about those last two questions?
I don't think so.
I
think
did.
It just
You
said
guys
that we were
did.
just supposed to like talk about it.
Yeah.
It was kind of vague. I was unsure.
Yeah.
I posted one, but I was like,
So what I thought is that she
don't know.
has the readings, and then she says number 2, do post 9, and then she says
Discuss.
3, then read the video. So you're supposed to post and then do the video.
Yeah,
So I figured that it
so-
wasn't supposed to be included in the post.
Sometimes she's always
That
out
makes
of order.
Yeah.
So it's like, I don't know.
I just did it just in case.
Is what?
You know, I kind of was feeling that way. I was like, there's 2 weeks left in the quarter.
Yeah.
I'm done with just in case.
Is there anything else you guys wanted to say about that video? Other than singing?
I mean,
Other
I
than this.
like, I'm gonna turn it on. I mean, I think the way they went about like explaining the capitals and how it affects the students, I see it now that they point it out because I haven't really like thought about it that explicitly. Like I don't remember which one she's talking about.
It's kind of funny because it's like things that are automatic, and then all of a sudden they're explained, and you're just like, oh.
Yeah, you're like, I noticed this.
I-
Oh, that's
alright.
what it is.
I'm
Yeah.
always like that. I'm always like that. I'm just learning new information that I already knew, I guess.
Mhm.
How do you guys think that video would go across with kids?
Probably getting made fun
Yeah. Well,
Movie
yeah.
getting
I feel like it was kind of, I don't know, I feel like the information in it wasn't really anything that would be super relevant to kids, you know? Like, I feel like the information was important, but it wasn't really like you said, it wasn't stuff we didn't already know. It's just like new
Mhm.
vocabulary terms
Yeah.
for it. But
There's
I
a
think that,
better way to do it.
yeah, but I also think that those like vocabulary terms aren't like really that important to know as long as
Yeah.
you discuss the ideas.
yeah.
Mhm. It's not really valid.
Yeah.
I agree.
Let's talk about the capitals. We're gonna
Mm.
the video talked about.
It was well, I'm trying to
It was
remember what they were. It was like
social,
linguistic, social.
Cultural and knowledge. Mhm.
Was that the one that we were supposed to relate back to our own
Yes.
childhood?
Mhm.
Because there was 2 that we had.
They were both kind of like really back to
Yeah.
Oh, they both said that?
Yeah.
Mhm. Mm.
I feel like all of those two are kind of, I don't know, like, you know how I was talking, I'm trying to remember if it was in the video or not, but I don't think it was. I think it was like one of the readings was talking about, you know, like kids who, or no, it wasn't the video. She was saying that like when she would go to her friends' houses, that like, you know, these people just had like encyclopedias all over and like stuff like that. You know, and like would read Time magazine. That was really funny. She was talking about magazines they read on the toilet. I feel like that's also not like something that I get that it's also like often is like trying to think about what I'm trying to say. Like I think that's not, that kind of is more of like a social class thing in general and not always like a race thing. And I get that like it can be and that like
Was she talking about race though? I thought she was referring to social class.
I guess she might have been. I guess I was just assuming that this always is going back to, I don't know, I guess because everything in this class seems to go back to that. I guess that's where my head was going. But maybe she wasn't. Yeah. But I was just thinking about like how many times I've heard like, I don't know. People say like, well, I grew up poor too and I'm white. Well,
Good for you.
Yeah.
It's interesting though thinking about how social class affects like your development of academic language. Like it's interesting because my brother and I are 9 years apart and we grew up in like very different points in my parents' like social stability. Like he grew up when they were still living in California and like they had to walk away from a house because it was getting foreclosed on. And then come up here, my mom is working in downtown Seattle, my dad has a job, like we're pretty like stable, and my brother and I are completely different, and I definitely feel like that's a part of it. And I tend to lean more towards like school and education, and he is, I don't know, he's more like hands-on stuff and probably less focused on like academic language. When I like to have like more academically context-driven conversations.
I think my family's kind of similar to that. Like my parents had me at 16, so they were still kind of obviously struggling for a very long time until they finally got their shit together. And now my brothers are 6 and 7, and so I feel like their life is, just a whole lot different than mine. My stepdad too is the kind of person that like we always tease him about it. He just likes to use like really big words unnecessarily. He's like the kind of person that like has a word of the day thing, and like because he just like I don't know. Is very like thinks that like makes you like a smarter person to use or seem like a smarter person to use big words and something like really values that.
There's somebody uses them incorrectly.
No,
Okay, good.
He's the kind of person that took high school Spanish and still remembers every word that he learned. Like he has, I don't know how he does it, but he always uses like really big words when he's talking to my brothers, like from the day they were born, and we would always like tease him when he's like using really big vocabulary as he's yelling at my brothers that are like 3. And we're like, right, they have no idea what you're saying. Like they don't know what they did wrong when you use words like that, And so we would always make fun of him. But now my brothers are 6 and 7, have the vocabulary of like, 14-year-olds.
Wow.
Because they're like, because they were exposed to that. My mom and I are like, well, I guess we made fun of them for no reason. But
Can't take it all back now.
yeah.
That's funny. I think it just kind of goes to show that like the differences that people have in the class. Because I mean, even when you have siblings, like you'll have the older child and then you have the younger child, and it's just you can't connect the two. Like they're two separate people. And that I always was in my sister's shadow, and we had the same upbringing. I mean, basically the same person. But I mean, they're always like, "Oh, you're Khalil's sister. Oh, you're Khalil's sister." It's like, yeah, my name's Alex. I have my own identity. Thank you. So I just think it's interesting that like even within families, you can't assume that they're at like the same level or the same academic language level or anything like that, especially with ELLs because of like the developmental process or time that they're coming into learning English.
Well, and it also brings to question because I think a lot about how like Jessica in 464 is like, how do you define success?
Mm-hmm.
And I wonder if there are families who define success as being more conversationally fluent or being more like academically fluent. Like someone might emigrate to America and think that like if you can make your way around the streets, like if you can talk to people and make connections, that's how you will succeed.
Mm.
But then there might be others who think that like if you can sound smart and well educated while speaking English, that's successful. So I don't know. Like should like one be placed in higher standard than the other, or like should they be seen as equal?
I think they have their different advantages.
Mhm.
Yeah. That's all I have to say about that.
Maybe it could be a money question.
Hmm?
Maybe it could be a money question.
What, being more fluent in CALPS or
Or
BIGS?
like should one, like is it right to have one placed as a higher standard than the other? Like as higher importance?
One student.
No, like BIGS or CALPS.
Oh, we're still talking about this. Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Oh,
I got a little confused there for a
That's
second.
Sorry,
what I
yeah.
asked, and then you said no, so now I was like,
Confused.
Okay. Yeah, that could be a good one.
like 25.
Should how did you say it?
Should
Is it right that BICS and CALP are like, or that like academic language is like really as is super valuable and important, while like conversational English isn't as much?
What's your determinant though? What's determining that? Like, you guys are saying that it is important, more important?
Well, we're just wondering, like
Oh, like societally.
is it
Wise.
right to place one as having higher importance than the other? Or it's like, should they be seen as equal? Should
Are you just saying like as an individual case, or are you just saying in general?
sort of in general and like
Okay.
in the school system?
Okay.
Like, because I feel like teachers have a tendency to place CALPS as having higher importance than BICS, like with the way that we talk to kids. Like, I think, I'm trying to remember, I think it was sometime last year, a professor was talking about like correcting students' grammar when you're just having a casual conversation with them. Like, if they're coming and they're talking to you about their weekend and they're like, oh, me and my mom went to the park, and then you're like, oh, my mom and I went to the park.
Oh, that happened to me all the time.
Yeah.
Especially with me and you, it's you not. Oh yeah,
Mm.
all the time.
And so it's like, did you really need to do that? Or like, should you be placing like more importance on the conversation that you're having with your student?
I guess also my thinking behind that, I'm not justifying it or anything, I guess
Mhm.
I'm just trying to come up with kind of a reason as to why I would personally do that. And it's just to translate your thinking and the way you form your syntax would make it easier for writing.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Because in writing, you don't say me and my mom, you say my mom and I.
Mhm.
And so that would just be my reason for trying to get that switch to turn for
Yeah.
your cognitive process,
Yeah.
is just to kind of get that smooth transition from your brain to writing. But at the same time, I bet that there's other studies out there, other ways to be able to do that, other than just sitting there correcting people.
I think there's a time and place too.
Mhm.
you know,
Yeah.
like, I think that was another thing they said in the video, like what I say is more important than how I say it.
Yeah.
And I think like
Yeah.
things like that count too. I remember so many times, specifically my stepdad with that grammar and vocabulary, like correcting me when I said things like that, like, you know, me and my mom went and did this, like, and then, I mean, you know, you do feel like when they correct you, instead of like responding to what you're saying, that like, you know, what you were saying isn't as important as
Yeah,
what
they
you're
didn't
saying.
really care.
Yeah.
Yeah. Like, how did it, you were saying that happened to you a lot. Like, how did that make you feel?
Yeah, so like same thing with like Alex was saying, I remember, like I can still visually remember this one time where this like EA, he was there all the way from kindergarten through 6th grade for me, and I loved him. And we would like have a conversation, I'd say like me and you, but he would correct me. And I remember being like, oh, you're so annoying. But like to this day, I can like visually remember having that like every time he would correct me. But it helped. It helped me because it changed my way of thinking with writing or with speaking. So I kind of like agree with Alex, like it helps. But I also see what you guys are saying with like there's a time and place for it. I just don't know what it is. Because it was just like casual. Every time I said it, he would correct me. But I felt more like it was annoying other than like he wasn't listening to me. Just like, why are you like this? Stop it.
Why are you like this?
And it's like, nobody cares. Just let me talk.
Yeah.
But obviously that's not how I feel that. So.
Well, for me, my mom, I mean, literally, I think this happened last week. But we'll be watching TV or talking with somebody in the living room, and we'll be talking. All of a sudden, you hear my mom just completely across the entire house, just going, "To whom?" And you're just like, "Okay, mom, thanks, good input."
So funny.
So you know, like at that point, it's not even the fact that you're like in the conversation. At that point, it's just correcting the language, and it's just always been a family joke, and so I've taken it very lighthearted. And when somebody corrects me, I'm like because my mom, she does that literally for everybody. Her work friends are even like, "Stop it." And so I don't know if you guys are saying the time and place, and I definitely understand that, and I believe that. But also at the same time, I guess I'm going to kind of play the devil's advocate a little bit, just to kind of get my thought process out there, is that we are always taught routine and repetitive is how kids learn. So if you have a time and place for correcting, is that really going to stick, or is the every single time going to stick more than the time and place?
Yeah.
And I think, and again, this is going off the base of we're saying that this is actually effective for changing it for writing. I'm not saying that that's true, but again, just going off of that base is that we need the repetitiveness and the consistency versus the time and place. So I guess that would be just my thought process on that.
Yeah, and that makes a lot of sense. And I think like reevaluating sort of the time and place thing, it might be more effective to think about like the more very obvious points where a kid needs to be heard rather than corrected. Like if it's a very serious conversation, like they're disclosing like deep information to you, like that's an obvious point, like correcting isn't important then. But I think like focusing on correcting and like the repetition whenever you can is helpful.
That's interesting because you say that, and my brain didn't even think about this. But if I'm sitting there like bawling my eyes out to my mom, and I'm just like he and she and she wouldn't correct me. So maybe that's kind of where my brain's automatically skipping over the time and place that you guys are thinking of because it didn't happen to me. So like when a kid is sitting there needing to vent or needing to like, or is angry or telling you something super important, yeah, I think you're right. I don't think that is I think that would be a time and place situation.
Yeah, and there was once where like everyone, my family is one of those families that just like we're constantly poking fun at each other, and there will be times where my mom says something and like considering that I do focus a lot on academic language, I'll like correct her and I'll sort of like make a joke about it. And there's been like once or twice where she's been like, I actually just really don't like it when you correct me. And she got really serious and she's just like, I really don't like that. Like it makes me feel bad. And I'm like, oh, okay. And so it's like her telling me, it's like, okay, that's, and granted it's my mom, that's a different scenario. It's not someone like I am literally being paid to teach. So, but it was just like, I keep on thinking about that. Like she was really not happy.
It could also depend on your relationship, like you were with your mom, and you said with your mom and your family, you take it very lightheartedly. I took it with an EA, or pretty much my teacher who I had grown up with from kindergarten to 6th grade, and I loved him, and everything I think was pretty lighthearted, so that's why I didn't take like too much of offense to it. So
and it's their job to teach you.
Yeah, and I always knew it was in his best interest, like it was for me, like this is for me, which of course I will speak like that in writing or in school, but casual, I'll just say me and you, just because that's what we all say. Do
And
you
also
and
it
me,
sounds
actually.
better, honestly.
Yeah.
It does.
Well, I've definitely noticed that our language has been changing in that, because I've noticed that when I was growing up, we were always, like him and I don't remember where me or yeah, there's rules on it. But I've also noticed that in the conversational language, as I have kind of grown up and in college and everything, it's changed. It's me and you. And it's just interesting that it's changed, because I remember I still sing all the songs that are teaching me the correct grammar that my mom's drilling in my brain. And so it's kind of funny, because now every time I hear it, I'm always like, it's him and I. It's just, yeah.
And it's funny thinking about like scenarios and relationships where you might like really focus on academic language versus conversational. Like the very obvious one is a job interview where you're like really focused on like the right grammar and saying the right thing. And like I think about the way that I acted or like the way that I spoke when I first started at my job in January, and then like the way that I'm talking now, like with my coworkers who I'm getting really comfortable with, and I start like throwing out more like conversational terms. And so it's interesting how much relationship has effect on like whether or not you use Bix or Calc.
I think it's also really interesting, because like for my interview, the serving is a very social thing. You need to prove that you're social. You need to prove that you can talk. You need to prove that you can hold a conversation and be super friendly right away. And so I wasn't as worried about my academic language, because I was more so worried about my social conversation. And are you able to keep that conversation going? Are you able to walk up to your manager and be like, "Hi, I'm Alex. How are you?" And very upfront and that kind of thing. So it's really interesting.
I feel like there is a difference between like informal and formal and Bix and Calcs though. Like
Yeah.
Okay.
yeah, because Calcs is literally like, oh, photosynthesis, like all
Yeah,
that
it is.
stuff.
It is more like context focused.
Exactly. So the way that you guys are referring to it, I think you mean it in a different.
Yeah,
I feel like we
thank you
started
for
out
making that
here and
distinction.
we've kind of
Yeah.
ended.
Yeah, I'm trying to bring it right back
We
here.
gotta-
Yeah, thank you. But yeah.
That's right though, right? Because Calcs
Yeah.
is
Yeah,
literally
Calcs, because
academic
we read the
classroom
same part in the book,
Yeah.
like the chapter 2 where they literally give examples of
Yeah.
words, and it's like photosynthesis and meiosis and like.
Just making that distinction,
Yeah, of course.
just in case I was misunderstanding it.
No.
I
Thank
don't
you
think
for
it's
making
limited
that
to like that content specific vocab either though. Like it's like it also includes, like we're talking about or reading about in the book about actually it might have just been my part talking about the reasons you use it, and it's like some of it's like high order like thinking, and like it is often like related to that like content specific stuff, but it also includes words like define and analyze and compare and things like that aren't like huge crazy words like that are like content specific, because they're words that can be used in a whole lot of different subjects, and you can throw them into a normal conversation about things that aren't academic, but like we just generally don't.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, that has to do with the brick and mortar thing that
Yeah.
I read. Yeah. Because like the brick is like the big heavy
Like
words.
photosynthesis.
Photosynthesis, but then the mortar that like ties them all together are those chemicals. Like defining, describing.
Yeah, which I think they described it as like what, general but sophisticated.
Yeah.
Which I think is a really good description of it. Like they can be used in multiple scenarios, but they still have this tone of sophistication to them.
Guys, this class is ruining me. I was just tutoring this morning. We were working on math, and I was like, she's reading the math problem, and I was just picking out all the academic language words. And I was like, why? Stop! I can't.
You'll never escape ELL.
And I was
ELL
like,
is
I was like, well, do you know what that word means? She's like, yeah, blah blah blah. And I'm like, all right, and we move on to the next academic language word. And I'm like, stop it.
I got really surprised because we were talking with the kids on our science practicum who are first graders, and I was like, oh, we need to gather evidence to support our claim. And they were like, and a couple of them were like, what does support mean? And I'm like, really? And like, I sort of paused for a moment, and then I had to think about like how to define support, which was a little difficult.
Yeah, that's from her.
I know, right?
What grade was this?
First grade.
Wow.
And so it made me think how easy it was to underestimate like their vocabulary understanding.
Well, I have kindergartners though that were
Yeah.
using that term support to me without me prompting them this quarter though too.
Really?
Oh, what?
Yeah, I am, because we were talking about
that foundation.
Oh, yeah.
foundation. So, and when I asked like, why are you doing the foundation first? I had this one kid, Carter, who was just like the smartest little boy ever. He was like, well, because the foundation is the support and you need support in the house. Yeah. It's like I never use those
In more
words.
ways
I
than
don't know how you use them. Yeah, so.
It's interesting.
Does anyone have any final thoughts?
Are we
If we're trying to
done?
waste some more time, I have something else that I brought.
Go for it.
Teddy Billy.
I know, it was from 4:30, 4:32, I don't know how many of you have taken that class yet.
Oh yeah,
You've taken that,
last
right?
year.
Jennifer Reed.
And I also don't know, I have a different teacher, so I don't know if she did this too yet, but it's kind of about, Paula's about, you were talking about passive voice in yours. And we were just learning about that in like that linguistics class. And I just thought it was interesting because it was like the way we're talking about it is, passive voice is like something that is used a lot in like reporting and things like that. But they're talking about how a lot of teachers will say like when you're writing, you want to use like active voice as often as you can and not really use passive voice. But we're talking about how there's like, I mean, obviously a time and a place for everything, but how like passive voice is often something that's used when you're talking about like delicate subjects to like avoid placing blame on people.
Oh yeah.
That's kind of what I was saying about the qualifiers. Is that what it was? Where it's like most of the people or some of the
Yeah.
people or
Yeah, it's kind of like that, but it's so like, and also the example you gave in the book for it was the cat was chasing the mouse. Was that in the book or that example? Do you know? You
I
Googled it?
Google I Google that shit.
So the like, okay, so what we're understanding from passive voice when I was studying in linguistics last week actually, was that like, because generally we have like a subject, verb, object, word order, like the cat chased the mouse. But for passive voice, it's like kind of switched where like the object, like that's having the verb done to them is first. So it's like the mouse was chased. And it could be by the cat, or sometimes you could just say the mouse was chased and completely ignore the subject. And that's often how it's used to avoid placing blame. But she brought this professor brought this article from, it's about, because all of our history books generally in the US are written to accommodate to what Texas wants, because it's like the biggest state.
That makes sense.
And the biggest buyer of history books.
Yeah.
And so there was a passage that she showed us that kind of demonstrates passive voice about slavery in the US. And
Oh
this
my
is an
gosh.
actual history textbook.
What is that?
So the first two sentences are active voice and the last two are passive. The first two are, some slaves reported that their masters treated them kindly. To protect their investment, some slaveholders provided adequate food and clothing for their slaves. And so both of them are like active voice, where it's like some slaves reported, so like the subject reported is the verb, and then like that they were treated kindly is obviously the object. But then the next two sentences are, however, severe treatment was very common. Whippings, brandings, and even worse, torture were all part of American slavery. But how those ones are both passive voice, like however severe treatment was very common.
Yeah.
It doesn't say
it
who,
isn't.
severely treated who. It's like, and then like whippings, brandings, and even worse is like the object. So like if you would switch that, I would say like, like masters often whipped, branded, or tortured slaves, but they like switched it and then left out the subject so that it like doesn't place blame on anyone.
That's
Just like,
That's
you know,
shady.
but it just like, I thought it was super interesting, just talking about like how things like passive voice are like super important and like can really make a big difference, you know?
yeah, affects the meaning.
I think it's definitely something that would be important to teach kids and to
Yeah.
keep an eye out for, you know?
Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up because I was a little confused about it, honestly.
Mhm.
Yeah.
It's
so.
tricky.
Props to you for listening. It's late in the quarter.
I find linguistics really interesting, honestly. I think it's like I'm the most annoying person in that class. They all hate me. I'm like, every single question, I'm like, I got it, I know the answers. And I like constantly am like correcting her on things all the time, and everyone, I can hear the people behind me like, God, shut the fuck up. Like, I really like that class. I think it's really fun.
No,
Yes.
it's a nightmare.
All right, any last words?
Bye.
That sounded really threatening.